actor, director, screenwriter, musician and author Crispin Glover is here. How are you doing, Crispin?
Great, thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. This is Mark.
Hello.
We just met outside. Can I just say it was one of those strange experiences when you're in the middle of talking about Rabbit Hole and Crispin Glover walks in the middle of it. So I was sorry, I wasn't blanking you. I was just I just couldn't quite make that tangential leap.
Yes.
How are you? Thank you for coming.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
It's good to have you here. Of course, Creepy Thin Man in Charlie's Angels, George McFly, Back to the Future, Andy Warhol in The Doors.
What I'm going to be showing in the UK is part 2 of what will be a trilogy. This film was written by Stephen C. Stewart, who is a man that had been born with a severe case of cerebral palsy. And when he was in his early 20s, his mother died, and he was locked into a nursing home, basically. And the people that were taking care of him there would derisively call him an MR, a mental retard, which is not a nice thing to say to anybody, but Steve was of normal intelligence, and the emotional turmoil he must have gone through for the decade he was there, I can't even begin to imagine. But when he got out, he did write this screenplay. I read the screenplay in 1988, and as soon as, or 87, as soon as I read it, I knew this would be something that I would have to personally fund and make sure to get it made. There is an emotional catharsis that happens in this film that is potent, and he wrote it in the style of a 1970s TV murder mystery movie of the week, which is a very specific style. And because he wrote it in this genre, as opposed to a standard autobiography, there are certain dynamics of the truths of his life that come through innately that, because it's written, like I say, in this genre style, become much clearer than if it had been written as a standard autobiography. It's a fantastical film. Now, this film is not a documentary by any means, but it is a documentation of this man enacting this fantasy that he had written for himself.
And do you use... So you're in Charlie's Angels. Can you use movies like that to fund?
That's exactly. In fact, that movie was the film. The money that I made from the first Charlie's Angels film, I specifically put right into making it's all shot on sets, to building the sets that...
So hang on, Crispin, you're telling me that you didn't work with McG for artistic reasons?
Well, I mean, the funny thing is that previous to that, after Back to the Future came out in 1985, I felt a certain, and that made so much money, I felt a certain obligation in the 80s and 90s to find, and specifically after that film came out, to find films that somehow psychologically reflected what my personal interests were. The first film I acted in after Back to the Future came out was River's Edge, which is a good film.
It's a fantastic film.
Yeah, that's a film I'm very proud of. But subsequent to that, most of the films didn't, in the 80s and 90s, I tried to find films where there were directors I liked or characters, what have you, but really, they did not necessarily reflect what my psychological interests were. They didn't necessarily make that much money, and that was not necessarily that good for my acting career. But in 1999, what if Steve's lungs had collapsed? I'd already put Steve into part 1 of the trilogy, What Is It? He had written his screenplay a long time before, but I realized as I was expanding part 1 into a feature that there were thematic similarities. If I put Steve in, it would make it his film a sequel of sorts. In 1999, one of his lungs collapsed, and it became apparent if we didn't shoot something soon, we never get to shoot anything at all. It was at that time that the first Charlie's Angels film had come to me. 3 years before, I would have turned it down. At that time, it was extremely important, but even then, I had reluctance. If you've seen the film,
yeah, I have.
I don't speak in the film. I'm a silent character.
Yeah, I didn't speak in the film either.
But I understand. But that's fair enough.